The snow fell silently on Christmas night, coating the sidewalk outside the Hamilton Hotel in a thin layer of white. The security camera mounted above the entrance captured everything, every word, every gesture, every catastrophic mistake. And Officer Alan Sanders had absolutely no idea that the woman he was about to handcuff had spent the last 11 years working federal investigations into public corruption, civil rights violations, and police misconduct. The woman standing near the row of luxury vehicles wasn't panicking. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't running. She was Special Agent Elizabeth Rogers, and she had investigated dirty cops in 4 states. She had testified before grand juries on civil rights abuses. She had protected senators, judges, and cabinet members. And now she was about to become the plaintiff in a federal lawsuit that would cost the city $500,000, destroy a police career, and trigger a Department of Justice investigation that would expose a pattern of racial profiling stretching back years. Before we continue, write in the comment section where you're watching from. And if you hate seeing people judged before being heard, please subscribe. Elizabeth Rogers had been with the FBI for 11 years, and in that time, she'd seen the worst of what people in power could do. She'd spent the majority of her career in the Civil Rights Division, investigating cases that made headlines, police departments that operated like criminal enterprises, sheriffs who ran their counties like personal fiefdoms, officers who saw the badge as permission rather than responsibility. She'd sat across interrogation tables from cops who swore they were just doing their job, right before the evidence proved they were doing anything but. She'd walked crime scenes where the only criminal was the one wearing a uniform. And now, on Christmas night, she was standing outside the Hamilton Hotel doing something entirely different, protecting the vice president's son at an alumni Christmas party. The assignment was straightforward. Daniel Reeves, the vice president's 26-year-old son, was attending his college reunion, a gathering of old classmates who'd scattered across the country after graduation and were finally reconnecting over eggnog and nostalgia. The Secret Service had assessed the threat level as low, but protocol required an FBI liaison for any event involving immediate family members of the vice president. Rogers had drawn the assignment 3 days earlier. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. She'd arrived 2 hours before the event, surveyed the venue, coordinated with hotel security, and established her perimeter. Now, at 9:47 p.m., she stood near the hotel's side entrance, her breath forming small clouds in the cold December air. Snow drifted down from the dark sky, collecting on the shoulders of her navy blue jacket. Beneath it, her FBI credentials hung from a lanyard around her neck, her service weapon holstered at her hip. Through the tall windows, she could see the warm glow of the party, twinkling lights wrapped around columns, a decorated Christmas tree in the corner, guests laughing and raising glasses. Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas played faintly from inside, muffled by the glass and the snow. Rogers scanned the parking lot methodically, her eyes moving from vehicle to vehicle, noting makes, models, license plates. A silver Lexus, a black Audi, a white Tesla. All belonged to party guests whose names she'd cross-referenced earlier. Everything was routine. Everything was calm. Daniel Reeves was inside with his friends, surrounded by vetted guests and hotel security. The perimeter was secure. She checked her watch. 2 more hours until the event ended. 2 more hours until she could file her report and head home to her own quiet Christmas evening. She pulled her jacket tighter against the cold and continued her circuit around the building, her boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. Behind her, red and blue lights suddenly flashed against the white hotel facade. Rogers turned, her hand instinctively moving toward her credentials. A patrol car had pulled into the lot, and an officer was stepping out, his hand already resting on his duty belt. The call had come in at 9:43 p.m., 4 minutes before Officer Alan Sanders pulled into the Hamilton Hotel parking lot. The dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio with the kind of vague report that could mean everything or nothing. Suspicious person at the Hamilton Hotel, 2400 Westbrook Avenue. Caller reports a black female pacing near vehicles, looking into car windows, possible vehicle prowler. Sanders acknowledged the call and turned his patrol car toward Westbrook. He'd been on duty for 6 hours, and this was his 4th call of the night. The other 3 had been nothing, a noise complaint that turned out to be a Christmas party, a fender bender with no injuries, a welfare check on an elderly man who'd simply forgotten to call his daughter. This one felt different. The Hamilton Hotel was in the kind of neighborhood where a suspicious person usually meant someone who didn't belong, someone who stood out. And in Sanders' experience, that usually meant someone looking for trouble. He'd been with the department for 8 years, working patrol in the Western District, the part of town where old money lived in renovated historic homes and new money bought condos with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the kind of area where people called the police if they saw someone they didn't recognize walking down their street. Sanders didn't mind those calls. In fact, he preferred them. They were easy stops, easy conversations, easy arrests if someone got difficult. And people got difficult more often than they should. As he pulled into the hotel parking lot, his headlights swept across rows of expensive cars, Mercedes, BMWs, a Range Rover near the entrance. And there, near the side of the building, he saw her. A black woman in dark clothing standing near a line of vehicles, her posture alert, her attention focused on the cars. Sanders felt his jaw tighten. The caller had been right. He put the car in park and radioed his location. "Dispatch, I'm on scene at the Hamilton. I've got visual on the subject." He didn't wait for a response. He stepped out of the patrol car, his hand moving automatically to rest on his duty belt, fingers near his radio, his eyes locked on the woman. She'd turned toward him now, watching him approach. That was usually the moment when they ran, but this one didn't run. She stood there, waiting, which made Sanders even more suspicious. People who waited were people who thought they could talk their way out of something. He crossed the parking lot with deliberate steps, his boots heavy on the pavement. The snow was falling harder now, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the woman ahead of him, on the way she stood too confidently, too calmly. By the time he was 20 feet away, he'd already decided how this was going to go. Rogers saw the officer approaching and immediately recognized the situation for what it was. She'd been mistaken for a threat. It happened more often than it should. Black professionals in the wrong place at the wrong time, viewed through the lens of suspicion rather than competence. She'd investigated dozens of cases just like this. Now she was living one. She raised her hands slightly, palms open, a non-threatening gesture she'd seen 1,000 times in training videos and body camera footage. "Officer, I'm FBI Special Agent Elizabeth Rogers. I'm on Federal Protective Detail." Her voice was calm, professional, the tone she'd used in hundreds of tense situations. She reached slowly for the credentials hanging around her neck, lifting them so he could see the gold badge and the identification card with her photo, her name, her title. Sanders stopped 6 feet away, his hand still resting on his belt. His eyes moved to the credentials, then back to her face, then to the credentials again. "Let me see that," he said, his voice flat, skeptical. Rogers unclipped the lanyard and held it out. Sanders took it, examining the badge under the glow of the hotel's exterior lights and the red and blue flash of his patrol car. He turned it over, held it up, squinted at the holographic seal. Rogers had seen that look before, the look of someone searching for a reason not to believe what was right in front of them. "Anyone can buy these things online," Sanders said finally, handing the credentials back to her with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "I've seen fake badges that look more real than this." Rogers felt a familiar tension settling into her shoulders, the kind that came when she knew a situation was about to get worse before it got better. "Officer, that is an official federal credential issued by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am currently assigned to a protective detail for a federal protectee inside this venue. If you need verification, I can provide you with the direct contact information for my supervisor, Special Agent in Charge Marcus Delano, or I can patch you through to the FBI field office." "I don't need to call anyone," Sanders said, his tone hardening. "What I need is for you to explain why you're pacing around looking into car windows." "I'm conducting a security sweep," Rogers replied evenly. "It's standard protocol for protective operations. I'm monitoring the perimeter and ensuring there are no threats to the protectee." Sanders crossed his arms. "Or you're casing vehicles and you've got a convenient story ready." Rogers took a breath, keeping her voice steady, reciting the federal code she'd memorized years ago. "Officer, under Title 18, Section 3052 of the U.S. Code, FBI special agents have the authority to conduct investigations and protective operations without interference from local law enforcement. I am operating within my federal jurisdiction. If you have concerns about my assignment, I can have my supervisor contact your watch commander to confirm." "I'm not calling your supervisor," Sanders said, "and I'm not taking orders from someone who might not even be who she says she is." Rogers reached slowly into her jacket pocket, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. "Officer, I'm going to show you my secure communications device. It contains encrypted messages from the FBI field office regarding this protective assignment." She pulled out the black smartphone, its screen lighting up to show the FBI's classified messaging system, complete with time-stamped directives, security protocols, and the details of Daniel Reeves's event schedule. Sanders glanced at the screen, his expression unchanging. "That could be anything. You could have downloaded some app that makes it look official." "This is a government-issued device," Rogers said, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. "The encryption alone would be impossible to replicate. Officer Sanders," she'd caught his nameplate now, "I'm offering you multiple ways to verify my identity and my assignment. I can provide the direct number to the FBI Washington field office. I can have my supervisor call your dispatch. I can show you the official authorization letter in my vehicle. What do you need from me to resolve this?" "What I need," Sanders said, stepping closer, "is for you to stop being evasive and answer my questions. You're interfering with a police investigation." "There is no investigation," Rogers said, her voice still controlled but with an edge now. "There's a vague call about a suspicious person, and I've provided you with clear evidence of my federal credentials and my authorized presence here. What you're doing right now is interfering with a federal protective operation." Sanders's hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at the Hamilton Hotel. Subject is being uncooperative." He kept his eyes on Rogers as he spoke, and she saw it then, the moment when his ego overrode his judgment, when proving he was right became more important than being right. Within 3 minutes, 2 more patrol cars pulled into the lot, their lights painting the snow-covered pavement in alternating colors. 4 officers emerged, and Sanders briefed them quickly, his version of events already shaping the narrative. Suspicious woman, fake credentials, uncooperative attitude. Rogers watched the other officers' body language shift, their stances widening, their attention sharpening on her. And then she noticed movement at the hotel windows. Party guests had begun to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the spectacle unfolding outside. She could see their faces pressed against the glass, phones raised, recording. And there, in the center of the crowd, was Daniel Reeves, the vice president's son, the man she was supposed to be protecting. He was watching her, confusion written across his face, and Rogers felt the situation slipping further out of control. The security perimeter she'd carefully established was collapsing. Her protectee was now exposed, watching his protection detail being treated like a criminal. And Officer Alan Sanders, surrounded by his backup, looked more confident than ever. "Ma'am," Sanders said, his voice loud enough for the other officers to hear, "I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Rogers' right hand moved to the small emergency button on her belt, a device every agent on protective detail carried. She pressed it once, firmly, sending an immediate distress signal to the FBI field office. Within 90 seconds, her phone began to ring. She looked at Sanders. "That's my supervisor. He's calling because I just activated my emergency protocol. You should answer it." Sanders ignored her. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Roger's phone continued to ring, the sound cutting through the cold night air. One of the backup officers shifted uncomfortably. "Sanders, maybe you should—" "I've got this," Sanders snapped. But Roger's phone stopped ringing, and 5 seconds later, Sanders' own radio crackled to life. Then his cell phone started buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Against his better judgment, or perhaps because the other officers were watching, he answered. "This is Officer Sanders." The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative, and left no room for misinterpretation. "Officer Sanders, this is Special Agent in Charge Marcus Delano, FBI Washington Field Office. You are currently detaining one of my agents, Special Agent Elizabeth Rogers, who is conducting an authorized federal protective operation under my direct supervision. I need you to step away from her immediately and contact your watch commander." Sanders's jaw tightened. He glanced at Rogers, then at his fellow officers, who were now watching him with open curiosity. "Sir, I'm investigating a suspicious person call, and this individual hasn't provided adequate—" "She has provided her federal credentials," Delano interrupted, his voice rising. "She has identified herself as an FBI agent. She has explained her assignment. What part of that is inadequate, Officer Sanders?" "Anyone can fake a badge," Sanders said, his voice defensive now. "I have reasonable suspicion to—" "You have an FBI special agent on protective detail for the Vice President's son," Delano said, each word deliberate and hard. "She is operating under federal authority. If you interfere with her assignment, you are interfering with a federal protective operation, which is a felony under Title 18, Section 111 of the U.S. Code. Am I being clear?" The other officers had gone quiet. One of them, an older cop with sergeant stripes, stepped forward. "Sanders, if that's the FBI—" Sanders ended the call. He stared at Rogers, his face flushed, his breathing slightly elevated. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the recognition that he'd made a mistake, followed immediately by the refusal to admit it. She'd seen it before in suspects, in witnesses, in officers who'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. The moment when pride became more important than truth. "I don't take orders from the FBI," Sanders said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for obstruction of a police investigation and interfering with an officer." Rogers didn't resist. She simply looked at him and said, very clearly, "Officer Sanders, you are making the worst mistake of your career." The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists as the snow continued to fall. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Rogers' wrists as Sanders tightened them, perhaps a notch tighter than necessary. The snow had picked up, falling in thick flakes that melted against her skin and caught in her hair. Through the hotel windows, she could see the crowd had grown larger, dozens of faces pressed against the glass, and the glow of phone screens held high, recording every moment of what was about to become a federal case study in how not to police. "Officer Sanders," Rogers said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation of being cuffed in front of a building full of witnesses, "you need to secure my service weapon. It's holstered on my right hip. Federal protocol requires—" "I know how to do my job," Sanders interrupted, reaching for the weapon. He removed it from the holster with hands that weren't quite steady, the weight of a federal agent's Glock suddenly very real in his grasp. He handed it to one of the backup officers, who took it with obvious reluctance, his face betraying the understanding that this situation had gone somewhere dangerous and irreversible. The hotel's side entrance burst open. Daniel Reeves stepped out, flanked by 2 hotel security guards in dark suits, their radios crackling with urgent chatter. "What the hell is going on?" Reeves demanded, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "That's Agent Rogers. She's FBI. She's supposed to be protecting me." Sanders turned toward him, his hand instinctively moving toward his duty belt in a gesture of authority. "Sir, I need you to go back inside. This is police business.
Police business?
Reeves stepped closer, his face flushed with anger and confusion. You just arrested a federal agent who's on protective detail for me. Do you have any idea who I am? I don't care who you are, Sanders said, his voice rising now, the adrenaline and pressure turning his judgment into something sharp and reckless. If you don't go back inside, I'll arrest you for interfering with an investigation. One of the hotel security guards spoke into his radio, his words clipped and urgent. More guests had pushed outside now, forming a small crowd on the sidewalk, their Christmas party forgotten in favor of the spectacle in the parking lot. Rogers could hear their voices, the questions and disbelief, and the phrase that kept repeating, "She's FBI. He's arresting an FBI agent." Sanders grabbed Rogers' arm and steered her toward his patrol car. She didn't resist, didn't pull away, didn't give him any reason to escalate further. She walked with her head up, her expression calm, because she knew exactly how this would play out, and she knew that every witness, every phone recording, every second of footage would matter when the federal lawyers got involved. Sanders opened the back door of the patrol car and guided her inside, one hand on her head, the choreography of 1,000 arrests. The door slammed shut, and Rogers sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, her federal weapon in the possession of local police, her protectee standing outside without his security detail on Christmas night. Through the window, she could see Daniel Reeves on his phone, talking rapidly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. The jurisdictional nightmare had officially begun. The police station was quiet on Christmas night, staffed by a skeleton crew of officers and civilians who'd drawn the short straw for holiday duty. Sanders led Rogers through the side entrance, past the booking area where a few intoxicated suspects sat in plastic chairs, and toward the processing desk. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with gray hair and 28 years on the job, looked up from his computer screen as they approached. His eyes moved from Sanders to Rogers, taking in the handcuffs, the professional attire, the calm expression on her face. Then his gaze dropped to the FBI credentials still hanging from the lanyard around her neck, visible even with her hands cuffed behind her back. The color drained from his face. "Jesus Christ, Sanders," the sergeant said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that Agent Rogers?" Sanders frowned. "You know her?" "Interagency training seminar last year," the sergeant said, standing up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She lectured on civil rights investigations and federal-local cooperation." He looked at Rogers, then back at Sanders. "She's FBI. What the hell did you arrest her for?" "Obstruction and interfering with an investigation," Sanders said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "She was acting suspicious outside the Hamilton Hotel." "And she was on protective detail," the sergeant interrupted. He reached for his phone. "I need to call the watch commander, now." 17 minutes later, 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the station's parking lot. The FBI's crisis response team had arrived. 6 agents in tactical gear, their faces grim, their movements efficient and purposeful. Special Agent in Charge Marcus Delano entered the building first, his credentials already in hand, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "Where is Agent Rogers?" The desk sergeant pointed toward the processing area, where Rogers still stood, her hands finally uncuffed, but her weapon still in police custody. Delano's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. He walked directly to Rogers. "Are you injured?" "No, sir," Rogers said. "But we have a problem. My protectee was left unsecured for—" She glanced at the clock on the wall. 37 minutes. Delano turned to face the watch commander, who had arrived minutes earlier and now stood near the desk with the expression of a man watching his career implode in real time. "Captain, your officer just arrested a federal agent conducting an authorized protective operation for a member of the vice president's family. Do you understand the magnitude of what just happened here?" The captain nodded, his face ashen. "We're releasing Agent Rogers immediately. Her weapon, her credentials, everything will be returned. I'm placing Officer Sanders on administrative leave pending. That's not your investigation anymore, Delano said. This is a federal matter. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already been notified. The Department of Justice will be conducting a full civil rights investigation. He turned to Rogers. Get your weapon. We're leaving. Rogers retrieved her service weapon from the evidence officer, checked the magazine, and holstered it. As she walked toward the exit with Delano and the response team, she heard Sanders' voice from somewhere behind her, quiet and desperate.
I was just doing my job.
She didn't turn around. The investigation took 3 months, but the pattern emerged within the first 2 weeks. FBI civil rights investigators, working in coordination with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, pulled every traffic stop, every incident report, every body camera video that Officer Alan Sanders had generated in his 8 years with the department. What they found wasn't just a single bad arrest on Christmas night. It was a career built on bias, hidden in plain sight and protected by a department that had repeatedly chosen to look the away. The data was damning. Over a 3-year period, Sanders had conducted 47 traffic stops in the Western District, a neighborhood that was 31% black, according to census data. Of those 47 stops, 34 involved black motorists, 73%. The statistical analysis, conducted by an expert from the Civil Rights Data Collaborative, showed that Sanders stopped black drivers at a rate 2.8 times higher than his colleagues patrolling the same area. The expert's report concluded with clinical precision. The disparity cannot be explained by crime rates, traffic patterns, or time of day. The data is consistent with targeting based on race. But the numbers only told part of the story. The investigators found complaints, 7 of them over 5 years, all filed by black professionals and all dismissed by the department's Internal Affairs Division with variations of the same conclusion. Officer acted within policy. No disciplinary action warranted. There was Dr. James Patterson, a cardiovascular surgeon, stopped outside the hospital where he worked and questioned for 20 minutes about whether his Mercedes was stolen. There were 2 attorneys, Brenda Klein and Marcus Hill, both stopped in the same month for failure to signal and subjected to searches of their vehicles despite no legal justification. There was City Councilman Trevor Adams, pulled over 3 blocks from his own home and asked to prove he lived in the neighborhood. Each complaint had been filed, investigated by Sanders' own department, and dismissed. The body camera footage was worse. The investigators compiled a highlight reel of Sanders' stops, and the language was consistent across years of recordings. You people need to understand this is a nice neighborhood. What are you really doing here? This neighborhood doesn't get a lot of your kind. In one stop, Sanders told a black woman in a business suit that she didn't look like she belonged in the area. In another, he told a black teenager that he was keeping an eye on him. The expert testimony came from Dr. Angela Moss, a psychologist specializing in implicit bias and law enforcement behavior. She reviewed 70 hours of Sanders' footage and wrote a report that became a centerpiece of the federal case. Officer Sanders displays a consistent pattern of presuming criminality based on race, she wrote. His interactions with black civilians show elevated suspicion, longer detention times, and more invasive questioning compared to white civilians in identical circumstances. This is textbook implicit bias, manifesting as discriminatory policing. The pattern wasn't hidden. It was documented, complained about, and ignored. Until it wasn't. The settlement came 7 months after Christmas night. $500,000 paid not by Officer Alan Sanders, who had nothing, but by the city, funded through federal civil rights statutes designed to hold municipalities accountable when their officers violated constitutional rights. The city's attorney had argued for a lower figure, but the federal lawyers had been unmoved. You arrested an FBI agent conducting a protective operation for the vice president's son, the lead attorney had said during mediation. You're lucky we're settling at all. Sanders was terminated 3 weeks after the arrest, the department's internal investigation concluding what everyone already knew. He had violated policy, ignored evidence, and allowed his personal biases to override his judgment. But termination wasn't enough. The state's Police Standards and Decertification Board held a hearing and voted unanimously to revoke Sanders' law enforcement certification, a decision that meant he could never wear a badge again, not in any jurisdiction, not in any capacity. His career was over. The Department of Justice went further. They issued a consent decree, a federal court order that placed the entire police department under oversight and mandated sweeping reforms. Mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, reviewed and updated annually. Body camera footage audits conducted by an independent civilian board. A new early warning system to flag officers with patterns of discriminatory stops. A community oversight committee with subpoena power. The decree would remain in effect for 5 years, with the possibility of extension if compliance faltered. Elizabeth Rogers returned to duty 2 months after the arrest, reassigned to the Civil Rights Division where she'd spent most of her career. But she didn't keep the settlement money. Instead, she established the Elizabeth Rogers Fellowship, a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in federal law enforcement. The fund would pay for tuition, training, and mentorship, creating pathways for young people who might otherwise never see themselves in the FBI. If Sanders had worked alongside more people who looked like me, Rogers said at the fellowship's launch, maybe he would have seen me as a colleague instead of a suspect. 6 months later, Rogers testified before the House Judiciary Committee's hearing on implicit bias in policing. She spoke for 12 minutes, her testimony measured and powerful, describing not just her own experience, but the pattern it revealed. Bias doesn't announce itself, she told the committee. It hides in assumptions, in gut feelings, in the split-second decisions officers make every day. And when departments ignore it, when they dismiss complaints and protect bad officers, they don't just fail the community, they fail the badge itself. The hearing was broadcast live. Clips circulated on news networks and social media, and in living rooms and police academies and civil rights organizations across the country, people watched an FBI agent who'd been handcuffed on Christmas night explain why accountability wasn't just necessary. It was the only way to honor what the badge was supposed to mean. Sanders never commented publicly. But the department changed. The reforms took hold, and the badge he'd dishonored was carried forward by people who understood its weight.